The war didn't start with bombs or battleships. It began with a massacre. The Galactic Union had always known humanity was a force to be reckoned with, but they thought they had found our weakness: mercy. It was a clever move. Strike at those least likely to fight back. Target the doctors, the medics, the ones who wore no armor, who carried no weapons. And so, on the 12th day of the Varkesh-human conflict, they bombed a hospital ship. Not just any hospital ship, the Nightingale. The Nightingale was humanity's floating sanctuary, a neutral zone vessel marked with the Crimson Cross of the Healers Pact. Its coordinates were broadcasted to all factions, ensuring its safety even in the deadliest war zones. Inside, humans worked tirelessly to save lives. Not just human lives but those of any species in need. The Varkesh knew this. And yet they struck. A single plasma lance, fired from a cloaked warship, burned through the Nightingale's hull, rupturing oxygen lines and igniting the medbay. Those who didn't die in the explosion suffocated in the vacuum. Hundreds perished in moments: doctors, nurses, children in critical care, even wounded Varkesh warriors that our medics had been treating. The Union called it a tragic misunderstanding. A faulty targeting system. Humanity called it something else. An execution. And we do not forgive executions. The broadcast was transmitted across every human world, every colony, every fleet. It played on every screen, every comm channel, every neural feed. The image was burned into the galaxy's memory. Dr. Ilara Vasquez, head of the Nightingale's medical team, floating lifelessly in the cold abyss. Her hands, once steady as she stitched flesh and repaired arteries, now curled, frozen in the vacuum. Around her, shattered vials of medicine drifted like eerie snowflakes, a cruel mockery of what could have been life-saving miracles. A message followed. A promise. You attacked Earth's healers. So now we send the angels of death. The Galactic Union dismissed it as empty human bravado. The Varkesh mocked it, laughing in their war councils. They should have known better. Because the angels of death were already on their way. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. Humanity's elite warriors had many names: shock troopers, void reapers, phantom corps, but the angels of death were something different. They weren't trained for war. They had never stepped foot on a battlefield. They weren't bred for destruction. They were healers. Or at least they used to be. Before the Nightingale, they had been the doctors and combat medics who worked in the darkest, bloodiest corners of the galaxy, saving lives where no one else would. They had witnessed the worst of war. They had mended the broken, patched together the dying, and performed miracles with shaking hands. And now they would take those hands and do something else. The angels of death weren't driven by orders or duty. They weren't bound by military law. They were fueled by something far older, far more dangerous than any doctrine of war. They were fueled by vengeance. And vengeance does not negotiate. The first target was an outpost orbiting Varkesh Prime. A fortress of steel and stone, garrisoned by 3,000 warriors. Shields strong enough to withstand a siege, anti-air defenses programmed to shoot down anything that moved. They thought they were untouchable. Until the angels arrived. There were no grand invasions, no fleets appearing on their sensors. No alarms blaring about incoming attacks. Just silence. Then the power flickered. The medical bays were the first to go dark. The life support systems, the sterilization fields, the automated injectors that kept their wounded alive. Every last one failed at the same time. Machines stopped mid-operation, leaving patients half-cut open, their organs exposed. Screams echoed through the halls. The station's commanders scrambled to restore control. But the more they fought, the worse it got. Automated defenses misfired on their own troops. Security doors sealed shut, trapping entire squads inside oxygen-starved corridors. Medbays flooded with anesthetics meant to dull pain, now turned into a suffocating poison. The angels didn't kill them with bullets. They killed them with knowledge. With the very expertise they once used to save lives. It was surgical, precise, and utterly terrifying. The station fell within hours. When the next patrol ship arrived, they found no survivors. Only a single message burned into the command terminal. Do you understand the cost now? The Varkesh did not. So the angels kept teaching. The next wave of strikes was even more brutal. On Varkesh-controlled worlds, entire medical facilities were found emptied, no bodies, just silence. Their wounded soldiers, who once relied on human-built medical technology, found their implants failing. Artificial hearts ceased to beat. Neuroregulators overloaded, sending waves of agony through every nerve in their bodies. Humanity had spent decades advancing medical science across the stars. They had built the most sophisticated cybernetics, the most efficient battlefield treatments, the most precise surgical techniques. And now, they used that knowledge to unmake their enemies one heartbeat at a time. The Varkesh panicked. Warriors who once marched into battle unafraid now hesitated. The bravest among them began refusing cybernetic enhancements, fearing the unseen hand that could turn their own bodies against them. Field hospitals were abandoned, their staff too terrified to operate. A single whispered phrase began spreading through the ranks, spoken in hushed, fearful tones. "Beware the ones who heal." But it was already too late. When the Galactic Union finally realized what was happening, they sent an envoy. A desperate plea to end the madness. But humanity did not respond. Instead, they sent back a single data file. A list of names. The names of every doctor, every nurse, every medic who had died on the Nightingale. At the bottom, one final sentence. "We are not done." And for the first time in their history, the Varkesh knew true fear. The Varkesh had fought many wars. They had burned colonies to the ground, annihilated civilizations, and stood victorious over the ruins of 100 worlds. But this was different. This was not war. This was judgment. And judgment did not come with demands or negotiations. It did not wait for surrender. It simply arrived. The angels of death had sent their message. And now they would deliver the final lesson. The High War Council of the Varkesh sat in eerie silence as the names of the Nightingale's dead scrolled across the massive holodisplay before them. Thousands of human medics, healers, and wounded casualties, all wiped out in an instant. The humans hadn't responded with diplomacy. They hadn't called for sanctions or negotiations. They had sent a list that grew shorter every passing day. Because for each name that disappeared from the display, a Varkesh leader, officer, or warlord vanished from existence. No battles. No fleet engagements. No assassins caught sneaking through the shadows. Only silence. And then death. The angels of death didn't come in warships. They came in whispers. They slipped past planetary defenses, infiltrated secure compounds, walked unseen through the halls of the Varkesh elite. And they brought retribution. Chancellor Gorvok of the Varkesh Dominion died screaming, his own neural implant overloading and frying his brainstem in an instant. The security cameras showed nothing. No breach. No assassin. Just the Chancellor clutching his skull as he convulsed, black veins spreading under his skin before he collapsed, his body twitching as if gripped by unseen hands. The Dominion's top general lasted a few days longer, until he awoke to find the entire medical wing of his flagship offline. Every cybernetic enhanced soldier aboard was dead in their sleep, their implants mysteriously disabled. He ordered an evacuation. He never made it to the escape pod. His lungs failed before he reached the door. And then came the worst revelation of all. The angels of death were already inside the Varkesh homeworld. "We are not done." The words had been burned into the display of the High War Council's central command room. The message appeared across every major terminal, every secure network, every warship's AI. No one had breached their security. No infiltrators had been detected. Yet the words remained. The silence stretched on until finally one of the counselors spoke, his voice a trembling whisper. "What do they want?" The response came seconds later. Not from a diplomat. Not from a fleet commander. But from a voice. A voice that echoed across the room from nowhere and everywhere at once. A voice distorted, synthesized, and yet coldly human. "What do we want?" The lights flickered. The hollow display warped, distorting as ghostly figures flickered into existence. Doctors. Nurses. Medics. Dead men and women whose names were on that list. Their hollow eyes bore into the Varkesh Council, unblinking, unyielding. The voice spoke again. "We want you to understand." The Varkesh counselors recoiled, their fear tangible. Understand? They understood war. They understood conquest. They had razed entire civilizations to the ground. But the angels of death were teaching them something they had never learned. The cost of mercy. Because humanity had offered mercy before. Their medics had healed enemy soldiers, repaired Varkesh limbs, cured their sicknesses, and even saved their wounded generals. And the Varkesh had repaid that kindness with a massacre. Now humanity would show them what happens when mercy is taken for granted. The executions continued. Not just soldiers, not just leaders, but those responsible. The weapons manufacturers who had supplied the bomb that destroyed the Nightingale were found dead in their bunkers, their air supply vented into space. The scientists who had developed the targeting system for the warship that fired the fatal shot were discovered lifeless in their research labs, their bodies intact but their neural implants fried from the inside. The bureaucrats who had authorized the attack suffered the cruelest fate of all, waking up in hospital beds with human medics standing over them. Silent, expressionless. And then, the machines keeping them alive shut down. One by one. The Varkesh homeworld burned, not from orbital bombardment, not from war, but from within. Hospitals shut down overnight. Supply chains collapsed. The entire planet teetered on the brink of medical catastrophe. They had never realized how much they relied on human technology, how deeply their military and civilian medical systems were intertwined with human advancements. Cybernetic augmentations, genetic enhancements, immunoboosters. All gifts from humanity. And all of them, revoked. The angels of death had not just come to kill. They had come to erase every last advancement humans had ever given them. And for the first time, the Varkesh saw their future. A future without human doctors. A future without human medicine. A future where every wound, every sickness, every injury meant slow, inevitable death. The realization shattered them. Because this was not just punishment. It was the total, surgical removal of mercy itself. The Galactic Union begged humanity to stop. They sent diplomats. They sent offers of reparations, of peace, of a 100-year treaty ensuring the protection of all medical personnel. But humanity did not answer. Because the angels of death were not listening. They were finishing what they had started. And for the first time in their existence, the Varkesh truly understood what they had done. They had not just provoked humanity. They had betrayed humanity. And there would be no coming back from that. The Varkesh homeworld was dying. Not from fire and fury. Not from orbital bombardment or invasion. But from silence. The silence of failing hospitals, of dead warlords, of entire sectors of infrastructure collapsing under the weight of their own dependence. The angels of death had ensured it. The High War Council of the Varkesh stood in the heart of their fortified command center, a citadel buried beneath miles of reinforced durasteel and radiation shielding. It had survived every war, every rebellion, every insurrection in their people's long history. But now it was a tomb. They had sealed themselves inside, desperate to find safety. But safety was an illusion. There was no enemy fleet in orbit, no human armies marching through the streets. Yet they were dying. Their immune systems, once bolstered by human-made biotechnologies, were failing. Their advanced cybernetics, reliant on human medical data, were shutting down. The angels of death had not simply come to kill them. They had come to unmake them. One of the warlords, his breathing labored, turned to the others, his voice trembling. "We must beg," he rasped. "We must." His words cut off as he collapsed, convulsing. The others recoiled as his eyes rolled back, black veins spreading across his skin. No one moved to help him. No one could. There were no doctors left to save him. In orbit above the Varkesh homeworld, the UNSC Oathkeeper stood in geosynchronous orbit, silent, waiting. Admiral Elias Corbin watched the planet below, his jaw set in stone. His officers worked quietly around him, waiting for the next command. But there was no need for orders. The plan was already in motion. Across the planet's surface, Varkesh strongholds collapsed under their own weight. No assassins. No orbital strikes. Only a cold, methodical unraveling of everything they had built. The Varkesh had always believed war was won by strength. By numbers. By superior firepower. They had never considered what would happen if war was fought like this. A war where there were no battlefields. No soldiers. Only inevitability. A soft chime rang through the bridge. A transmission request. Corbin exhaled through his nose. He knew what it would say before he even answered. The screen flickered to life, and the desperate hollow face of Supreme Chancellor Calvor appeared. The last true leader of the Varkesh. His once proud crest of spines had dulled, his skin sagging from stress and malnutrition. His eyes, once filled with the arrogance of a conqueror, were now empty. A dead man walking. "Human," Calvor croaked. We surrender." Admiral Corbin leaned forward, resting his elbows on the command table, his gaze steady. "We are past surrender," he said evenly. Calvor flinched, his breath hitching. Then, "Mercy. We ask for mercy." A flicker of something passed through Corbin's expression. Something cold. "Mercy?" he repeated as if tasting the word. Calvor swallowed, nodding frantically. "We." Corbin cut him off with a single motion. "You murdered thousands of our healers," he said, his voice like ice. "You didn't just attack a warship. You slaughtered the very people who would have saved you." Calvor's trembling grew worse. It was a mistake, he gasped. A tragic, terrible mistake. Corbin tilted his head. No, he said softly. A mistake is when you fire on a ship you thought was a combat vessel. A mistake is when you misinterpret a maneuver and respond with force. His eyes locked onto Calvor's. This was not a mistake. This was intent. You chose to kill our healers. Calvor shrank back. Please, he whispered. If we could undo it, we would. He stopped as Corbin leaned in. Undo it? The Admiral said, his voice low and sharp. Do you think you're the first species to beg us for mercy after committing genocide? Calvor's breathing was shallow now, his body trembling. Corbin's eyes burned with quiet fury. Mercy, he said, was what we sent on the Nightingale. He let the word sink in. And you murdered it. The Varkesh homeworld was not bombed. It was not invaded. It was abandoned. Humanity pulled every last medical advancement. Every cure. Every vaccine. Every cybernetic and genetic enhancement that had once kept the Varkesh powerful. The angels of death left no graves. No bodies. Only silence. And within a single generation the Varkesh, once a mighty empire, was nothing more than dust in the wind. Humanity had not wiped them out. They had let them fade into irrelevance. A fitting punishment. For those who murder healers. There is no salvation. The last days of the Varkesh. The silence that had consumed the Varkesh homeworld was not sudden. It was slow. Methodical. A creeping death, hollowing out an empire that had once stood unchallenged. Without human medical advancements, their genetic weaknesses re-emerged. Ancient diseases, long thought eradicated, returned with vengeance. Their cybernetics failed, their elites left crippled by the very enhancements that had once made them strong. For a while they had hope. Perhaps they could repair what was lost. Perhaps, with time they could rebuild. But time was not on their side. The angels of death had left them with one final gift: quarantine. No species dared to help them. No traders, no smugglers, no black market medics. Even those who had once been allies of the Varkesh refused to answer their desperate calls. Because the humans had spoken. And when humanity speaks, the galaxy listens. Above the wasteland, a single ship remained in orbit over the Varkesh homeworld. The UNSC Oathkeeper had stayed, watching, waiting. Admiral Elias Corbin stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind his back. His officers remained quiet, sensing the weight of the moment. The once glorious capital city of the Varkesh was a corpse. No smoke. No destruction. Just emptiness. They're done, Commander Voss murmured, standing beside him. Corbin exhaled, his gaze unreadable. Not yet. The Varkesh weren't just dying. They were learning. Even now, deep within their crumbling citadel, the remnants of their leadership clung to existence. Desperation had given way to something else. Understanding. Understanding of their mistakes. Understanding of the horrors they had unleashed upon themselves. Corbin knew this because he had read the intercepted transmissions. The ones where the last survivors whispered of guilt, of regret, and of one final plea. A single transmission had been sent out, broadcasted across every surviving communication channel. A message not of surrender, not of defiance, but of atonement. It had taken them this long to finally ask the one question they should have asked from the beginning. How do we make this right? The reckoning. The screen before Corbin flickered to life. The Supreme Chancellor was gone. So were the warlords. Instead, the new face of the Varkesh was a single scholar. A historian. His name was Kesari Volume. He had not fought in the wars. He had not ordered the attack on the Nightingale. But he was the last one left who could still speak for his people. His face was gaunt, his breathing shallow. Malnourishment had hollowed him out, but his eyes, those deep violet eyes, held something no other Varkesh leader had possessed before. Humility. We understand now, Kesari rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. We understand what we did. Corbin said nothing. We were blind, Kesari continued. We saw your healers as weak as nothing more than tools of war. We did not see them as you saw them. He swallowed hard. We do now. The transmission room aboard the Oathkeeper was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Because this was the moment. The moment where Corbin would decide if the angels of death were finished, or if their mission was not yet complete. Kesari's voice trembled. Tell us how to fix this. Tell us how we... He hesitated, his pride still a lingering poison. Then, in a voice raw with suffering, he forced the words out. How we can earn forgiveness. The choice. Admiral Corbin closed his eyes. There it was. The thing he had never thought he would hear. Not from them. Humanity had been wronged before. Humanity had suffered. But rarely, so rarely, did those who had wronged them understand what they had done. And even rarer still, did they ask to make it right. Corbin turned to Commander Voss. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. Voss exhaled through his nose, arms crossed. "If it were up to me, I'd leave them to rot." Corbin nodded. He turned back to the screen. Kesari was still there, waiting, his skeletal frame trembling with the effort of staying upright. A long silence stretched between them. Then Corbin spoke. "There are some wounds," he said slowly, "that can never heal." Kesari closed his eyes, nodding. He had expected this. "But," Corbin continued, "there is one thing you can do." Kesari's eyes snapped open. The bridge officers leaned in. Corbin's gaze burned into him. "You will document everything," the Admiral said. "Every detail of what you did. Every mistake. Every failure. You will write down the story of your downfall, not as martyrs, not as victims, but as monsters who destroyed themselves." Kesari swallowed. "You will teach the next generation," Corbin continued. "Not just your own, because your people may not have a next generation, but every species that will listen. You will make sure that no one forgets what happens when you murder healers." He leaned forward, voice razor sharp. "That is the only thing you can do." A slow breath escaped Kesari's lips. Then weakly he nodded. The legacy of the Angels of Death. The Oathkeeper left Varkesh space 3 hours later. The Angels of Death had no more work to do here. But their message remained. And in the centuries to come, when young species looked upon the ruins of the Varkesh Empire, they would find the records. The chronicles of the fallen. A record of arrogance, of cruelty, and of the terrible price of betraying those who only sought to heal. Some species would scoff at it, dismissing it as an old tale. Others would whisper it in hushed tones, terrified of what humanity had done. But the wisest among them? They would learn. Because the Angels of Death were not destroyers. They were teachers. And their lessons would never be forgotten. End of story. Humanity does not forgive lightly. And for those who betray our healers, there is only one lesson. Subscribe now to hear the next tale of vengeance and justice.